From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Kansas landowners stand their ground. The U.S. Department of Energy cancels a plan to build an energy corridor across the state. Also, the Wichita City Council approves swifter action to clear out homeless encampments. But first, the council finally approves a paid parking plan for downtown despite much opposition. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. Hello and welcome to Kansas Week. I'm Jared Cerullo. It's been a long process to settle on a plan, but it is now official. Parking your car for more than 15 minutes in downtown Wichita will cost you. Despite opposition from business owners and the mayor, the Wichita City Council approved $1 an hour parking fees for downtown. Cake's Jocelyn Schifferdecker explains.
You're supposed to be able to bounce around from one place to another and not be concerned about having to make sure that you have enough time on your meter.
Co-owner of Mort's Martini and Cigar Bar, Emma Johnson, was one of several downtown business owners against paid parking at the Wichita City Council meeting Tuesday morning.
I have the concern about my staff. Where are they going to park? We leave at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, how far away are they going to have to be?
This is a conversation that has been going on for almost a year now.
The idea that we're the 50th biggest city, and out of the top 100 cities, we're the only one that doesn't have managed parking is absolutely embarrassing to me.
After months of talks and lengthy meetings, the Wichita City Council approved a plan that will charge $1 an hour to park downtown after 15 minutes. And people will have to pay until 9 p.m. on Friday nights and Saturday nights.
Paid parking is critical for the health and vibrancy of a developing downtown.
The city says this plan should bring in more than $450,000 in its first full year. This will help pay for maintaining lots and garages. Yet the paid parking will not extend west to Delano. Along with voting no, Mayor Lily Wu brought up a concern she has about parking agreements with Old Town business owners not being enforced for decades.
I'm so upset about this. This means that the city of Wichita lost out in $13 million worth of revenue that could have helped with the $18 million in deferred maintenance over the last 25 years.
While Old Town will have paid parking, there is an option that business owners can petition the city to pay for space each month themselves so visitors wouldn't have to pay.
There's no business downtown that I have talked to that is not pro CID and increased fees to keep the environment of Old Town the same.
Here to discuss this and some of this week's other big stories are Democratic State Representative Casey Ohabisam from Wichita, Harvey County Now Managing Editor Adam Strunk, and Republican political consultant Ben Davis from Cato Consulting. Thank you to you three for joining us today. Ben, I'll start with you. The city of Wichita has a long history of not following up on its contracts and following those things. And here within the last week, we found out that sure enough, here's another example of the city that hasn't been, some of the businesses, I should say, haven't been paying into the kitty like they should have. Is that an excuse to put this off now? The council has already done it, but is this an excuse to maybe wait and delay this like a lot of people wanted?
No, I don't think so. And I want to give major applause to Mayor Wu for digging into these past contracts. I think she spent an entire weekend combing through paperwork to come to the realization that these businesses have not been paying, or more likely, it's the city of Wichita who's not been enforcing these contracts. I don't want to put the burden so much on the businesses. They're going to pay whatever invoice they get. But who at the city dropped the ball on this? Good for her for calling them out, holding accountability and transparency. I think Wichita's really fortunate to have Lily Wu as our mayor.
Paid parking, though, there has been so much opposition to it. But like the mayor said, or like Council Member Tuttle said, and Council Member Ballard as well, we're a big enough city that we have to do this.
Yeah, I think so. I think they chose the best option that I could see out of a lot of not great options.
Right.
And I think $1 per hour does not seem unreasonable. And it also gives the option for the CID, if the downtown businesses choose to go that route. It sounds like they may have the support to do that. I think the council lowered the threshold from 80% down to 55%, making it easier for them to pass. Sounds like that might be an option that we will know about here in the next 30 to 45 days.
Yeah. Adam Strunk, I'll move over to you. You're from Harvey County, so what are your thoughts coming into Wichita? Would this stray you?
I mean,
from...
my main thought is, and I didn't see it in the story, and it's been a few days. How are they charging that? Are they charging it through meters, or do I have to get an app?
It's an app.
Look, I'm not going to stop going to Wichita if I want to go to a brewery, if I want to do this, if I want to go out to eat when I'm not eating in many of our great Newton restaurants. No, it's not going to stop me. I'll complain about the app. I hate the apps. I hate parking apps.
You have to put your credit card
and your information gets stolen, and you get an email or a letter 2 years later, and no one helps you out with that. But I mean, here's the other take, just on a marketing standpoint. They were like, well, we're the only city that doesn't charge for parking. Maybe that's something they market the downtown as, like, we're a really friendly downtown. Come to our downtown. You don't have to pay for parking.
You don't have to pay. Yeah.
I don't know, but
Casey, I think that some of the argument that I've heard anyway is that in other bigger cities where there is paid parking, there are more things to do. There are more attractions, and Wichita doesn't have that.
And not only that, I mean, the parking space that we actually have during downtown is not everything's being utilized all the time. I mean, I think it's like 40 to 50% that only being used at a particular amount of time, which means the other 50% is just open. So
I think it was even less than that.
It was less than that.
There was a study done in 2021 when I was on the council that showed 35% of parking spaces in downtown Wichita are taken up at any one point. That leaves 65% that's vacant.
I know, and so in other words, you're punishing or kind of putting all the burden on that. Less people that are actually using it. But again, it goes back to what he was saying with respect to somebody dropped the ball at City Hall in terms of not enforcing. I think if businesses were given this particular invoice to pay their parkings, I don't think we should have gotten to this point. So,
well, and I think the reality of it is that the city of Wichita is facing major budget deficits. We're facing $18 million in deferred maintenance just in the downtown core, 13 million of which now we've missed out on because these contracts were not enforced since 1996. So at the end of the day, we're going to have to find diverse ways of trying to raise that income without continually raising taxes. So it was a really unfortunate decision that we had to come to, but at the end of the day, I don't really know what else they're supposed to do to try to recoup some of these losses other than to pass this. And again, maybe the CID is the option that the businesses will go with.
Do you think it will have an effect on the businesses downtown, though? The large opposition that I'm hearing is saying we're going to boycott downtown. Do you think that's actually going to happen?
I think it's always a possibility. I don't think that we've seen that in other cities, but again, sometimes that's comparing apples to oranges. And so there's a part of it you'll just have to see once they've implemented it. But again, I think if they're able to get the support, that the CID will end up passing and we won't even see paid parking.
Yep. All right. The Wichita City Council also very busy taking a harder line on homeless encampments this week. They approved an ordinance that eliminates the requirement for a 72-hour notice to clear out areas where people are camping on public property. This is part of the city's ongoing effort to deal with the ongoing homeless issue that continues to plague the city. Wichita's emergency shelters are now equipped to house 266 people at a time. That is a significant increase over last winter. And Ben Davis, I'll start with you. You've been outspoken on this topic. You think the council is going in the right direction. There's been strong opposition to this as well.
Absolutely, and I was one of the very few, I think 3 people who spoke in support of the ordinance on Tuesday's meeting. Look, this ordinance has been in place since 2013. All this did was update and tighten some of the language. Homelessness has increased exponentially since 2013. You see many businesses in downtown who've had to spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars setting up barricades and fences around the place because their businesses are being taken over. The outsides of them are completely trashed. Go down to 3rd and Topeka and see if that looks like a good idea. It looks like a war zone down there.
It's bad.
And I would remind folks, I'll even call out the name, Brandon Johnson in particular, on this. There's nothing stopping anybody who was in opposition to this ordinance from petitioning the city to get a permit to allow the homeless to come to their front lawn and set up a camp if they'd like to do so.
Good point. Adam Strunk, do you have any comments on the homeless issue?
Well, I think a lot of people have a lot of strong thoughts about the homeless issue, and no one's ever gotten a good solution to it. I mean, sure, like, I think that does impact businesses. On the other end, do we have the capacity to take care of them? Do we have the capacity to help out? Like, eventually, like, and again, I'm not arguing for or against, I'm just saying, like, if we make it illegal for a person to exist in a public place, what happens? Like, we're gonna arrest them, let's put them in the jail. Then all the people complaining about paying for homeless encampments, paying for this, paying for that. Now we're paying taxes to take care of people in the jail. Like, there seems to be, like, making it illegal for a human to exist at all. Like, it seems to not be a really great thing within our society. And, like, I really think people need to keep this in mind when they really push for some of this hardline stuff. And it might increase what we pay, and it might increase what we pay in a less efficient manner. Like,
it's tough. I get it. Casey, it seems like, and there were clearly a lot more people at the council meeting opposed to what the council was doing, but in all fairness, I didn't hear any solutions from those people. I mean, they're against targeting. Targeting isn't the right word, but they're against this solution that the council is proposing, but they aren't proposing any solutions themselves.
Well, I thank you for saying that, because at the same time, there were no solutions that were actually, given at the meeting. We've done everything we can with respect to on the state level. I mean, I think last year the governor had $40 million in the budget to address infrastructure needs with respect to homelessness, which pretty much got diverted into IDD programs. But I think that hopefully this next session we can actually address it on the state level. It goes back to what Adam was talking about. We have to keep in mind that these are human beings, and at the same time, people that are actually facing homelessness, may be suffering from a lot of things. It could be mental health. It could be something that is actually not allowing them to actually progress, as a as a human being. But you talked about Councilman Johnson. Councilman Johnson he's been very supportive with respect to making sure that we're taking care of the homeless. With
Absolutely,
respect to he's been a forefront. Councilman Johnson's been a forefront.
I'm not disputing that, but here's what I'm going to say: we have an established history of enforcing this exact same ordinance since 2013, really without any issues. All the updated ordinance did was tighten up some of the language, actually reduce the fine, and I know the fine is kind of ridiculous, and I think it's kind of stupid, but just reduce the amount of time and gave a little bit more license for the city authorities to clear up some of these camps. Because when the homeless continue to move outside of certain corridors into neighborhoods and other things, and then citizens who grow concerned for their own safety and just the aesthetic of their neighborhood that they're paying taxes on, it gives them a little bit more of a recourse to say, look, we want these camps cleaned up. It certainly is not making somebody's existence illegal, and I think that kind of hyperbolic language that we saw at the council meeting is just not helpful at all. I think what it's doing is trying to give citizens, taxpayers, recourse to say, we feel that we shouldn't necessarily have homelessness moving into our neighborhoods.
But here's the question. Okay, you clear out a camp. Where do they go? They just don't stop existing. Do they move to the next neighborhood? Do they move to all these other towns? Like, do they? Because, I mean, Harvey County, we have services for homeless people. We have a lot of really good services in Harvey County because we have a lot of people who really, really care.
For 800 of them?
No, but that's the issue, right? Because like we have all these surrounding small towns, and what do? They drive them to, like, and again, these are people. I don't like saying they drive them to the border, but like they take all of their people that are in their communities, they move them into Newton, and then Newton ends up taking care of it, and then that's the same thing where you just keep pushing them. Like these people aren't going to disappear. So I guess at the end of the day, if it's not in our community, I guess that's fine. But it's not like they're going to disappear, or they might go into other residential neighborhoods. They might find a new park.
Which that's certainly not the solution either. But there are lots of resources, and I think part of the misnomer here is that we keep talking about the 266 or 270 beds. That's the city of Wichita's emergency shelter that our tax dollars are paying for. There are lots of other organizations, such as the Union Rescue Mission, that have lots of available beds, available programs. And what we heard continually were people being somewhat duplicitous in how they were saying it. On one hand, well, we need to give more shelter and more resources. But on the other hand, nobody trusts the shelters and resources we have, but yet they had no way to bridge that gap. So then, yeah, it continues to go back to we're just shuffling people around, which is not itself humane. I completely agree with that.
And continuing to let them trash our streets, trash our river, that's not a solution either, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we have this wonderful downtown area. We've spent, millions of dollars developing this for joggers and entertainment and all this stuff, only to see homeless encampments surrounding it. People no longer want to go down there or do anything because they feel unsafe, and the whole place is completely trashed.
Yeah. All right. It's a hot topic for sure. And we'll move on now, of course. The U.S. Department of Energy has canceled its plan to create a designated corridor of new power lines and electrical substations across rural Kansas. Many property owners in the affected areas saw it as a land grab, and they fought tooth and nail. Cake's Pilar Pedraza explains.
I think we're kind of late to the game.
Doug McNett is the Pawnee County attorney. He was one of several local politicians who got together to oppose a proposed National Interest Electric Transmission Corridor, or NETC. The U.S. Department of Energy says these corridors are designed to help areas without enough energy or with unreliable energy service in the area keep the power on, no matter the location or current conditions. But Kansans saw a land grab, fearing the corridors would let the federal government use eminent domain to take their property.
I've never seen such an emotional issue as I have over this one from the people involved.
Neither McNett nor U.S. Senator Roger Marshall was even aware of the proposed Midwest Plains corridor that would run through 14 Kansas counties until local landowners brought it to their attention last summer.
The Department of Energy had actually announced this back in the spring, and nobody seemed to pick up on what their plan was. Within just a few days of me publicly saying, I think this is something we need to all work together on, there were huge town hall meetings scheduled in several of the counties that are kind of adjacent to us.
To get 500 people to go away from their job or away from a basketball game that night, whatever it was quite a showing.
Those folks mounted a write-in campaign, sending letters and emails to the Department of Energy and their congressional delegation demanding the end of the corridor plan. The feds listened, and the Midwest Plains corridor is no more.
Well, I was pleased. I'm not overly surprised by that decision.
The defeat, these politicians say, a lesson in the power of voters speaking up.
You gotta listen to what is being put out there. Don't ignore it, and get involved.
Casey, I'll start with you. You start talking about eminent domain, and people get riled up really quickly.
That's correct. And, first of all, kudos to our federal delegation, for actually stepping up and actually addressing this particular issue. This is, we talked before the show in terms of it's important for voters to be involved, with respect to whether it's local level, state level, or federal. I mean, this is where an instance where people got out instead of writing letters, sending to our federal delegation, and they took action. We in the legislature, we've heard about this particular complaint. Our chair on the utility committee, Representative Delperdang, has talked about us having a hearing with respect to eminent domain and with respect to eminent domain, involving power companies, so that this actually doesn't transpire again here in our state. So I'm very glad to see this. Again, kudos to our federal delegation for taking action.
Yeah. Ben, anything to comment here?
I happened to be at the very first town hall that they had up in Pawnee County when this thing really began to kind of hit the waves. And it was fascinating to see the outpouring of folks who were in opposition to this. And I know that the federal government and the power companies and everything kind of had their explanation of it. But at the end of the day, the language was very vague. And it certainly allowed for the potential of eminent domain up to 5 miles. And the citizens came together and say, absolutely not. And I think it just also goes to show just the kind of the spirit of in the air of just the general distrust of especially the federal government and what their plans may have been, especially for rural America. And so I'm really happy that those folks stood up, spoke out, and to your point, I'm glad that our federal delegation heard them and put a stop to this.
Yeah, and Adam, it's interesting that I had never heard of this corridor until this story.
And we wrote an editorial about it. Roger Marshall, I think, had put out a release, or maybe he was quoted somewhere, it was about 6 months ago, where he was talking about one of the issues that they've saw there is the lack of media coverage out in that area, because you've got these towns that are drying up, you have less businesses on Main Street, you can't support newspapers, or you have newspapers that get consolidated to where there isn't a good canary in a coal mine watching a lot of this. Because I guarantee in Harvey County, the minute a letter goes out where they're could take up to to 5 miles, we would have people calling like day of. Yeah. And I think that's one thing to keep in mind of the importance of like local media and supporting local media out in some of these areas, because like you have deserts where Channel 12, KPTS, no one's going out there unless there's like an explosion. So like, where do these people get their news outside of crap on Facebook that someone's aunt's mom posts? Like, it's an important issue, and it's important to highlight that, yeah, sometimes when you don't have a healthy news media ecosystem, you have stuff like this hit people by a surprise.
And you know, Ben Davis, it does bring up a good point, I guess, that we have so much solar energy out in, why do we need these power lines?
And I think, at least how I saw it earlier this summer, that a lot of this movement was spearheaded by a lot of the rural folks who are very much against wind and solar coming in, and they were the ones really getting the word out there. And you know, we can debate that for another day, but that certainly was underlying a lot of this angst here. And I'm glad that it prevailed.
All right. Kansas U.S. Senator Roger Marshall is joining with incoming President Donald Trump to consider privatizing the U.S. Postal Service. However, as Cake's Nick Nelson shows us, rural areas could suffer if that happens.
Not the worst idea I've ever heard. It really isn't. You know, it's a lot different today with between Amazon and UPS and FedEx and all the things that you didn't have. But there is talk about that.
That was President-elect Donald Trump at a news conference Monday talking about the possibility of privatizing the U.S. Postal Service. Kansas Senator Roger Marshall, who's been working to get answers from the USPS on slow delivery times, agrees, saying the current system is broken.
I think the Postmaster General has done everything he can. Congress has thrown hundreds of billions of dollars at the problem, and we can't seem to solve it. The Postal Service lost $6 billion last year. They lost $10 billion this year. And I think when you hear President Trump talking about privatizing the United States Postal Services, I think there's reason behind that.
Many are worried, however, that if a federal mail delivery service no longer exists, private companies won't be able to guarantee mail will get to everyone. Local American Postal Workers Union President Christine Pruitt emphasizes the potential negative effects of privatization, particularly in rural areas.
What people don't realize is we deliver FedEx and UPS's last mile to rural areas. So as long as you live in a big city, yeah, that privatization would work great for you. But if you live in a suburb, not so great. If you live in western Kansas, you're not getting your mail. You will have to drive to Wichita or Salina or Topeka to get your mail. It won't be delivered to you. That's what privatization does.
Those using the post office in downtown Wichita had mixed feelings about the USPS potentially going away. Gary Donovan says while he's open to the idea, he's concerned private information could be compromised if there are no federal regulations.
We're having hackers, and you know, we've got some companies here in town that they've had some employees give our credit card numbers away, and then I got to change credit cards. And I mean, that's time out of my day. I don't need that. And that's my biggest concern.
Adam Strunk, chime in here.
Well, I think, and you know, I saw the story, I read the story, read the quotes, listed the quotes. I think this is a situation of how things get covered and how you need to watch what people do and not what they say. So, like, we're not talking about Canada becoming the 51st state. Like Donald Trump last week was talking about making Canada a state. Like, he was talking, he was riffing, he said, yeah, it's not a bad idea. Some people have said it, you know, maybe we do this. Things have changed. None of this is inaccurate. And then they go to Roger Marshall for a quote. Roger Marshall, we were talking about how he was trying to get an appointment in the administration before the show. So like Roger Marshall's going to say this is a bad idea. Roger Marshall's been a good person hearing Kansans and questioning the Postal Service. Like, we have huge issues with the Postal Service as a news industry because most newspapers use the Postal Service to deliver mail now. But on the end of the day, like, you have to watch what they do and not what they say. Like, Roger Marshall also in his press releases always includes that he got a post office for Winchester, Kansas. There's a lot of conservative legislators at the federal level that, like, they have these rural districts. Like, these rural people really rely on the post office. That's a local coffee shop. That's a local gathering place. You want to kill a town, you kill their post office, you kill their school, and maybe you kill their newspaper. And so, like, I don't know if we're at the point now where I think that there is enough want and emphasis to do this and to make the change. Also, there's a million other issues that it would bring up, like where do you get your passports? Like doing that, like there's all of these different voting. Like, how does that work? Mail-in votes go away, I guess. but there's a lot of different things where this would be a really, really difficult issue to do. Now, should we be having conversations about the Postal Service? Yes. Should we be having conversations about how bad the service has gotten? Yes. But like a lot of that has to do with recent management strategies too. And the last bit, and then I'll let you guys talk. Sorry, I'm passionate about this. The last bit is like, I do believe like, yeah, we should try to make sure it runs as good as possible, but it is a postal service. It's not a postal business. And it is a service that the federal government created because they thought it was in the public's interest to have a way to access their mail. Now, you can argue that there's better services for that now. I think that's a fair argument. But like, that was the service it created. That's like arguing the Department of Defense lost $1 trillion last year. I guess they're really bad at doing business. Well, they're in charge of defense. And so I think that's an important little bit of conversation of the issue.
And Casey, you know, it's interesting, the thought that comes across my mind is 80 to 90% of the stuff that I get in the mail is advertising and junk.
Yeah,
so
political advertising and junk.
True, that's true, but it's hard to defend the mail service when so much of it is waste.
Well, that's true. And with respect to you know, all the stuff that you're getting, the content, you know, advertising, you know, with the emergence of technology, people are now using, you know, emails and all that, compared to before where people actually would send actual letters and all that. But I totally agree with Adam. I mean, this, I think, is more of a management issue. How do we restructure and manage and make it more efficient versus, you know, trying to privatize it? Because just like they were saying, you know, if you privatize it, I don't think people in rural areas are going to get their mails, you know, or it's going to be even more difficult for them to get their mails. In the urban areas would be perfect, but in rural areas they may suffer. So that's where my disagreement is. I think we should not privatize it and just leave everything the way it is and actually focus on how to actually make it more efficient.
And Ben Davis, there are still many, many people that write a check and put a stamp on an envelope to pay their bills each month too, you know?
I think there needs to be massive restructuring if not. Look, this is something that was talked about in 2011, I believe, because the post office was facing a huge shortfall in the budget. Again, it's this really weird kind of public private thing. It's not just wholly by the federal government. It's this weird thing. I also think that the postal union has not been helpful here at all. It's been very hard to renegotiate or restructure things because they're not acting in good faith. At least they weren't back in 2011, but I would suspect that that might be the case here again. I think that we need to take a good hard look at it. I don't necessarily know if privatizing right now, maybe it would be a gradual thing, but I think there definitely needs to be a lot of restructuring up and down the federal government, local government, state government. As we can even see, to come full circle back to the parking, I wonder how many contracts aren't being enforced, like what we saw at the city, at the federal level. What's all the taxpayer waste that's going into these things just because it's the way we've done it before?
Yeah. All right. That's a wrap for this week. And again, I want to thank Casey O'Hobbesome, Adam Strunk, Ben Davis for joining us this week, and we also want to thank Cake and KSN for sharing their stories with us as well. I'm Jared Cerullo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.